back to the Conspiracy Couple podcast. I'm Marisa.
And I'm Ethan.
And we are here with the very first episode of 2022. I almost said 2021.
Earlier you did say 2021. You said she cut her finger today and she said it was my first injury of 2021. But it is in fact 2022.
Yeah.
If you didn't know, it is.
It is, yeah. So not only did I cut my finger making a bagel, but I also didn't know what year it was. So 2022, and I'm still an idiot.
You're not an idiot.
But like in a good way.
Okay.
So we are so excited to begin another year with you guys here on the podcast, and if you're watching on YouTube, hello. 2021 was a good year. We started our YouTube. We got Nova.
2021 was an okay year.
It was
up and down.
Overall good, I would say. Yeah.
Up and down.
Up and down.
I would say.
Rest in peace to Betty White.
Oh, yeah, that was very sad.
I had to throw that out there because if you don't know this about me, I'm a Golden Girls super fan. Golden Girls super fan. Have watched every episode at least 6 or 7 times.
We watched the Golden Girls every night of our honeymoon.
Yeah.
Mostly because it was on, but
yeah.
Also because it is good.
It's very good. If you haven't watched it, it's on Hulu. So go watch the Golden Girls in Betty White's memory.
Rest in peace to all
of the Golden Girls.
The Golden Girls.
Thank you all for being a friend. Or for being friends.
Thank you for being a friend.
I'll start crying again.
All right.
Okay, so one piece of housekeeping that we're going to just get out of the way before we dive right into our topic is Spotify ratings.
Yes.
Every single podcast say, give us a 5-star rating on your streaming platform of choice. Well,
as far as we know, the only place you have been able to do that is Apple.
Silly me. I thought that you could do it on any platform, but apparently you could only do it on Apple. But as of, I think, like 2 weeks ago, you can now do ratings on Spotify.
Yes.
So to our Spotify listeners, welcome to the club. You can go rate us 5 stars, and we would really appreciate it.
Yes. Can you leave reviews on Spotify as well?
You can, I think.
Leave a nice review.
Leave a nice review.
Tell us what you want us to talk about in the future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you are not an Apple or Spotify listener, go leave reviews on Apple and Spotify anyway. It costs you no money.
Yeah.
And like 5 seconds of time.
That's right.
Your review could say literally, this is a good podcast.
It could just be the thumbs up emoji.
It could just say, this is a podcast. I wouldn't mind.
It could literally be the thumbs up emoji. It could be like the tongue out emoji. I would be okay with that. Anyways, 2022 is the year where I do not take forever on the introduction. And we just get right into the topic. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in.
Unless there's something to talk about in the introduction. Maybe another part of the introduction is just a reminder that we have a 9-month-old kitten running around. Mm-hmm. So if there are any disturbances, or if you notice any cuts in the video, if you are watching on YouTube, which subscribe on YouTube, by the way, like the video, share, turn post notifications on.
Yeah.
Back to what I was saying though. Nova, our 9-month-old kitten, is roaming around and she's crazy and she likes to attack wires and different things. She likes to attack everything basically. Yeah. So she might make an appearance. She might make a disturbance. So that is what's going on. Domino, the first conspiracy cat, is just watching very, very peacefully from our table.
She's literally an angel.
Yes.
Nova's
also an angel. She's just destructive.
She's a crazy little girl.
Very sweet, and she's been napping pretty much all day, which means she's now going crazy.
That means that it's playtime.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
She didn't check her schedule with ours.
No.
So.
Mm-mm. She does not care our schedule.
No.
That's the thing about cats. They just don't care.
It's true.
And I admire about them. Yeah. So should I say my goals for the podcast for 2022?
Sure.
Okay, I
like how you're like, this is the year where we don't have long intros, and we're still on the intro.
Okay, well, we're actually doing pretty well. So I just looked at the
I just thought it was funny.
Okay, so I have 2 goals for the podcast in 2022 as of right now, and y'all could help us get there. So the first goal is to get 1,000 followers on Instagram. That's definitely doable.
Oh, we're well on the way.
Definitely doable.
Over halfway there.
So yes. So
we're
if you guys
60% of the way
follow
there.
us on Instagram, share us with your friends, that would be a great thing. And I also want to get 100 subscribers on YouTube.
Yes.
We are a percentage of the way there. I'm not going to say what percent. But
it's low.
Subscribe, like, and turn on post notifications. So that's it. That's all I have.
Cool.
Okay. And we're going to hop right in. So this week we are actually going to be discussing a case that has been, I guess, requested by a couple listeners. So fun fact, if you did not know, we are super, super interested in you guys' recommendations for topics. And if you request it, most of the time I'll cover it or I'll add it to my list. So you can just send us an Instagram DM or an email or, a Twitter DM. Is that what you do on Twitter?
Yes.
Yeah, a Twitter DM and with what your recommendation would be, and we'll put it on our list. So just an aside, we're very interactive on social media. Let's dive right in. So our first topic of 2022, I almost said 2021 again. Our first topic of 2022.
I mean, it's only the second day for us.
It's the first day.
It is the first day. It comes out on the second day. I was saying that for the listeners' sake.
Oh, yeah. Is the mystery surrounding D.B. Cooper.
D.B. Coop.
D.B. Coop. So we're going to just get right into it. We're going to start off Thanksgiving Eve, November 24th, 1971.
Not going to ask me anything?
Oh.
Who are you?
I'm so... This
2022 has changed you as a
Ethan.
podcast host.
Ethan, as always, do you know anything
about...
about...
Yeah, as always. Huh, interesting.
Do you know anything about D.B. Coop?
I do know a little bit about D.B. Coop. Some of our listeners may know because they were there during a dinner sometime around Christmas with my family. Mm-hmm. We started talking about D.B. Cooper. And I actually did know a tiny bit about him. I didn't know as much as we talked about that night, and I won't say all that. But basically, he was a bank robber who disappeared out of a plane.
Nova just leapt onto Ethan's arm and bit him.
She didn't bite me. She just... I don't know what that was. She tried to attack me. Anyway.
He wasn't a bank robber.
Didn't he rob a bank?
No.
I thought he robbed a bank.
He has... We'll get into it.
Anyway, he did something bad and then escaped with money. I know he had money. He stole money. And he was in a plane, jumped off the plane, and was never found.
Okay.
Also,
Ethan has a lot of knowledge.
Apparently might be Loki. If you've seen
spoilers.
The Marvel show Loki. What, is that a part of the conspiracy?
Yeah, I actually have a bullet point.
Oh my gosh.
This is Loki.
I didn't expect that to be part of the conspiracies, but sorry.
I had to throw it in there.
I did not know that you had to throw it in.
I love the God of Mischief.
But that was... Anyway.
Anyways.
I don't think that's a conspiracy. I think that was...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ethan, for all of that information about D.B. Coop. We're probably going to call him that for
No,
the
let's
duration.
just call him D.B. Cooper.
So, we're starting off now. Thanksgiving Eve, November 24th, 1971. A man calling himself...
Why didn't we do this for a Thanksgiving episode?
Because I didn't have the knowledge, and I didn't realize that it was Thanksgiving Eve. And I don't think we did a Thanksgiving episode.
We didn't, but we could have.
Anyways, so a man who called himself Dan Cooper used a $20 bill to buy a one-way plane ticket for Flight 305 on Northwest Orient Airlines from Portland to Seattle.
Dang, $20 flight?
Yes.
What a life.
Right. He literally, I watched a couple of documentaries about this, and probably the most shocking thing to me was that he literally just handed a $20 bill to the person at the airline and bought a plane ticket.
That's ridiculous. That's insane.
What? So he gave a $20 bill to the ticket agent, and at that time, he did not need to present any form of ID. He just gave the $20 bill, hence why we only know him as Dan Cooper. Mm-hmm. So at that time, we're going to get into this a little bit more. Security checks weren't really a thing. Security checks at airports didn't become a big thing until post 9/11.
Right.
Which I think is wild.
That is kind of wild, because that's like most of my memory of flights is just like the post 9/11 like TSA.
Yeah, getting to the airport 3 hours early so you can wait in the line.
Yeah.
You can't, once you're in the line, if you leave, you got to go back in the line. It's like, ugh,
it's wild.
It's very wild. But yeah, at that time, 1971, security checks weren't really a thing. He didn't need his ID. He just handed them a $20 bill.
That's wild.
Yeah, I know. It was a simpler time back then. It was a simpler time. So he was described by witnesses as being in his mid-40s, wearing a business-looking outfit of a suit and a nice overcoat. He was wearing loafers, and he also carried a briefcase and a brown paper bag. So 2 of the flight attendants provided very consistent descriptions, and they were interviewed separately and together, and both of them matched up. They also said he was about between 5'10" to 6 foot, and that he was around 170 to 180 pounds, and that he had brown eyes. And they also said that he had a very low voice, and that he sounded really intelligent when he talked. He had a really great vocabulary, which I love that they pointed out. I am a vocabulary queen. I remember in school when I would use a really big word, my teacher would be like, that's a 50-cent word. That was just... Anyways, so I really like that they pointed that out. So, anyways, while he's on the flight, he orders a bourbon and soda, and his seat was kind of near the back of the airplane. He was on seat 18E. So, at about 3 p.m., while the flight was on its way to Seattle, Cooper passed the stewardess a note. So, she doesn't read the note right off the bat. She puts it in her pocket, and Cooper looks at her and says, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." So the reason she initially put the note in her pocket and not read it right there was because she thought that he was flirting with her or that he had passed her his phone number or something. And she said apparently at that time, which is not surprising, it was really common that people would like slip flight attendants their phone numbers. Yeah. And so she just thought that's what he was doing. So she just put the note in her pocket. And then he was quoted as saying, "You better look at that note, I have a bomb." So, as I mentioned earlier, it would have been feasible that he had a bomb because there wasn't really security checks.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if you remember like old Twilight Zone episodes, but people would bring guns on planes, they would bring cigarettes on planes, they could have feasibly brought a bomb on the plane. So, that's just so wild to me. So wild to me.
Ridiculous.
So, imagine you're the stewardess. This guy, you think he's just giving you his phone number. He says, "No, that I have a bomb." So she's pretty shocked, and he instructed her to sit down next to him, where he pulled out his briefcase, opened the briefcase, and showed her the contents of what was inside, which was red sticks with a bunch of wires surrounding them.
So like dynamite?
Looked like dynamite, yeah. So he then told her to take his note and his message to the pilot of the plane, quoted as saying, "I want $200,000 by 5 p.m. in cash. Put in a knapsack. I want 2 back parachutes and 2 front parachutes. When we land, I want a fuel truck ready to refuel. No funny stuff or I'll do the job." And he had the stewardess write that note down and take it to the pilot. And I saw one video that said he specified that he wanted the bills to be $20 bills, but then a lot of other research said he did not specify. So
who is he robbing? He's robbing the plane?
He was robbing... We'll get there.
Okay.
So when she saw the note, and when he gave her the note, she ran back to the cockpit to show the other flight attendants and the pilot. And the pilot placed a call to air traffic control, who then called the FBI. And the FBI called the president of the airline. And the president of the airline said, "Comply with the demands."
So he was robbing the airline.
The airline company, yes.
Okay.
So he also made the flight attendants give him back both of the notes. So he gave them to the flight attendants and take this to the pilot. And then he said, "Give me these back." Because he didn't want any evidence pointing to his identity.
Right.
So we don't have the notes. We just have the flight attendants saying this is what was on the note. So the flight arrives in Seattle. And at that time, he allowed the 36 passengers on board to get off the plane in exchange for the money. And he instructed the pilot to taxi the plane to a really remote part of the airport and basically said, "Okay, let all the passengers off here." And apparently at the time, the passengers didn't know what was happening. And a crew member was instructed to come with the money by themselves, drive up to the plane, and meet him there with the money, and then leave. So he forced 4 of the crew members to stay on the plane. So the pilot, co-pilot, and 2 flight attendants to stay on the plane with him, and instructed the pilot fly from Seattle to Mexico City using whatever route he chose. But he had to end up in Mexico City.
Mm-hmm.
So he also asked the pilot to keep the plane flying at below an altitude of 10,000 feet and to fly at a speed of less than 200 miles per hour. And the pilot informed him that he wouldn't have enough fuel to get to Mexico City without stopping to refuel at some point on the way. So they settled on Reno, Nevada instead. And they did refuel in Seattle before they took off. So Cooper instructed all of the crew members to stay in the cockpit.
Well, sorry, you probably said this. Where was the original flight from?
It was from Portland to Seattle.
Portland to Seattle, that's right.
Yeah, so he goes from Portland to Seattle, and then he says, okay, when we get to Seattle, give me the money, and then we're going to fly to Mexico City.
Okay.
And then the pilot said, we will not have enough fuel to get there without refueling. And he said, okay, fine, Reno.
Okay.
So when they were taking off, he made all of the crew members stay in the cockpit with the pilot, with like the doors closed, so that they could not see what he was doing in the main part of the plane. So partway through the flight, he put on, this was I think the first flight, he put on a pair of dark wraparound sunglasses that would become part of his famous sketch. So at about 8 p.m., when the plane was somewhere between Seattle and Reno, he opened the rear doors of the plane and jumped out with the two of the parachutes and all of the money. So it wasn't very far into the flight that the pilots got a notification that the rear stairs had opened. And it was about 30 minutes after that notification that there was a change in cabin pressure that indicated that he had jumped off the plane. And the pilot noticed that the change in cabin pressure occurred about 25 miles away from Portland, near the Lewis River. But at this time, none of the crew left the cockpit to check if he had jumped, as they were scared to go against what he had said, in case he was still there. So he also, before he jumped, took off his tie, which was a clip-on tie that he had purchased from JCPenney. And JCPenney just was like, hello, we're going to throw our name in there. Yeah, I love that they put that in that he bought it at JCPenney.
Interesting.
So the FBI was able to use DNA from the tie in the investigation. And so the FBI initially believed that he knew a lot about airplanes, specifically that model of airplane, and that he chose that model because of the rear stairs, as there was only one model that had the rear stairs.
Interesting.
And he also knew at what altitude a person could breathe normally without the cabin being pressurized, which was below 10,000 feet. So that will kind of play into it. So the early days of the investigation. Now we've talked about the event. He gets on the plane, he demands money, and he jumps from the plane.
Strange.
So early days of the investigation. Originally, the case was called Norjack, which was short for Northwest Hijacking.
That's an awful name.
Yeah.
It's not a good name.
No. Norjack. It could use some improvement.
Yeah.
And of course the case was huge, and the plane was intensely searched for any evidence that could lead to his identity. This was actually the biggest unsolved air hijacking that has occurred in the history of the United States.
Wow.
So the area they suspected that he jumped off at was also extensively searched, but they came up with nothing. So they weren't exactly sure where he jumped off, but they thought it was somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. And the $20 bills that Cooper had stolen were all printed with a similar serial number, which will come into play later in the investigation.
Okay.
So in the first 5 years of the investigation, over 800 people were investigated as possibly being Cooper, But after investigating, only 24 people remained as suspects.
Are you going to talk about where the bee came from?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, this whole time I've just been thinking, where's the bee?
Yeah.
We've heard Dan Cooper. Where's the bee?
Yeah. So, 1980, which was 9 years later, we have a really big, break in the case. So, a young boy found a bag of cash while looking for firewood on the beach with his father.
Where?
We're going to get there.
Oh.
So the contents inside were moldy and were rotting and contained a wad of $20 bills. And those $20 bills had the same serial number as the ones that were stolen by Cooper. So remember when I said that he requested that all of the money have random serial numbers that were not sequential? So the FBI obliged. However, they made it so that all of the money had one similarity, the letter L at the beginning of the serial number. So they were all different numbers, but they all had the letter L. So that was how they could confirm this is the money that he stole.
Interesting.
So the bag contained $5,800 in total and was found at Tina Bar in Vancouver, Washington.
Oh.
So Tina Bar is a little beach located along the Columbia River. So the police weren't really sure how the money came to end up there, but there were a couple different hypotheses about it. So the main one was that the money fell into the Washougal River and made its way to Tina Bar.
Where's the Washougal River?
It's in Washington. It's like, I think it's an offshoot of the Columbia.
Oh.
So,
well, every river in Washington is an offshoot of the Columbia.
Yeah, so Vancouver is, for people who are not from Washington...
Vancouver's right next to Portland.
Yeah, it's like the south of Washington, almost
basically on the border, yeah.
Yeah, but something about Washington...
It's Portland, but Washington.
Something about Washington beaches is they are absolutely garbage.
They're rocks.
They're terrible. They're rocks, and they're really, like, cold, and they're really, like, musty, and, like... Is that the right word? Where it's just wet. Everything is wet. The air is wet.
Humid.
It's not humid. The air is wet. The ground is wet.
You're
the
describing
plants are wet.
humidity.
No, it's not humidity.
The air is wet?
No, it's like... Okay, Western Washington people, you know exactly what I mean. It's not humidity. It's like... always misty. Like, it's always about to rain.
You're clearly just describing humidity.
No, okay. If you're from Western Washington, you know exactly what I mean. No,
the humidity is like, about the moisture in the air.
If you're from Western Washington,
there are different types of humidity.
And you've been to any beach in Western Washington, you know exactly what I mean.
There are different types.
And they're like really little beaches.
Anyway.
So basically, it's like the southwest part of Washington, almost Oregon. So they thought that the money ended up first in the Washougal River, and then...
Still, tell me where that was.
Okay, well, I'll just pull it up.
No, it's not worth it. How do you even spell it?
Like that.
Oh.
Skamania County. You know what else is in Skamania County?
Less.
Bigfoot.
I know less.
Skamania County is the Bigfoot capital of the world.
I did not know that.
It's, let's see, it's in Clark County, by Clark County.
I thought you said it was in Skamania County.
Okay, so Washougal, it starts in Skamania County, and its lower 12 miles are in Clark County.
I don't know where any of this stuff is.
Okay, so
Ethan's
not going to know, but if you're from Western Washington, it's by Camas, which is by Vancouver, which is by Portland.
I know where Vancouver is. So you should have just said it's by Vancouver.
Well,
I wasn't sure if it started further away and then came to Vancouver.
It's 30 miles long. The Washougal is.
Oh, so it's by Vancouver.
It's an offshoot of the Vancouver.
You just said it was by Vancouver. I would have accepted that.
I'm moving on. However, this theory was not something that everyone really bought into, just because they were thinking the timing that it would take for the money to make its way down the river and end up buried there wasn't really consistent with how long they suspected it had been there. So they also came to the conclusion
it also doesn't explain why it's there, why it was in the river.
nothing explains why it was in the river. So they also came to the conclusion that the money arrived at that spot 3 years after the heist. So in 1974, that's how long the money had been there.
Okay.
And that led people to think that Cooper came back and buried the money there.
But only $5,000 of it?
Right. Rather than the river depositing the money there. So they said that if the river actually moved it, it would have taken longer. It would have gotten there way faster than 3 years. The question is, why would he do that?
Right.
Why would he bury the money?
Why would he bury $5,000?
Well, I'm thinking, did he know that the money was hot and that the FBI was tracking the serial numbers?
But why wouldn't he hide the rest of the money?
The question is, did he hide the rest of the money? We just haven't found it yet.
That's fair.
Yeah, so it's...
Maybe we should go dig up the Washugal.
If you would like to find some moldy money and you live it...
Hey, moldy money still counts.
And you live near that area, then you know what? Maybe it could be a good family bonding experience to get some little shovels and go dig on the Washougal River.
Moldy money still counts. You can still
People go
use it.
clamming out there all the time, I think. Anyways. So, another problem is after they searched the area, they couldn't find any more money and they couldn't find any more clues. However, shortly after that, Mount St. Helens erupted, which further destroyed any likelihood of finding more clues in that area.
Yep.
A lot of you guys who are listening probably don't know when Mount St. Helens erupted, but let's see, I think it was 1981. May 18th, 1980.
You were close.
Yeah, it was a really big eruption. My grandfather was actually on the mountain when it erupted. Elvis Presley.
You have to have listened to our Elvis Presley episode to get what she's saying there.
My grandpa's Elvis.
He's not, but yes.
Yeah. Anyways. So, Mount St. Helens erupts, which kind of destroys.
Don't you think if your grandpa was Elvis, your mom would know?
No.
Why?
I just think that he's a very mysterious man.
But wasn't she living with him when he would have been Elvis?
Yeah. There was a period of time where he went and he left for longer periods of time to go to school. To get his master's degree.
This is not the Elvis episode.
Anyways. So that was like a big thing, but didn't really lead to any answers, just kind of more questions.
The Mount St. Helens thing, not the Elvis thing.
Yeah, we're off the Elvis subject now. So you mentioned, okay, well, if his name was Dan Cooper, why does everyone call him D.B. Cooper?
I mean, it sounds cooler. I will give you that.
Sounds a lot cooler.
Dan Cooper? Not great.
Yeah, so D.B. Cooper was actually a mistake. And the FBI thinks that the change from Dan Cooper to D.B. Cooper was kind of like a game of telephone. And that the press heard them say Dan Cooper. Someone thought it said D.B. Cooper, so they printed D.B. Cooper. And by the time the FBI corrected them and said, it's actually Dan, it's not D.B., the story had already taken on so much, ground.
Well, I'm glad that they made that mistake, because D.B. Cooper is a way better criminal name than Dan Cooper.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was never supposed to be D.B., it's supposed to be Dan. And something interesting as well about this case were that a lot of people were really thirsty for some clout in the 70s, and so they would call the FBI and the media and say, I'm D.B. Cooper. So a lot of people came forward and said they were D.B. Cooper, and they were all investigated. They all had fingerprints, they all had DNA taken, and none of them were actually him. And they actually investigated a person named D.B. Cooper, and it was not him.
What was his name?
It was D.B. Cooper.
What was the D
I
and the
don't
B
know.
stand for? Well, it should have been Dan Cooper, not D.B. Cooper. The FBI should have known that.
Yeah, but anyways. So the charges against him were changed over time as well. So initially he was charged with air piracy. So
kind of a cool crime.
Yeah.
It's not a cool crime, but
crime
it's
is
a
not
cool
cool.
sounding crime.
Crime's not cool.
Aerial piracy?
Air piracy. So the problem with this was that air piracy carried a 5-year statute of limitations.
Oh.
And as
really?
the year...
Why?
I don't know. Something that I will never
I get
understand.
having a statute of limitations, but why have it different for different crimes?
I do not understand the statute of limitations. I feel like this is such a rudimentary law and justice thing, and I'm like, I'll be watching a crime show and be like, but why? But why? But anyways, so air piracy had a 5-year statute of limitations, and...
But that is kind of weird. They're like, oh yeah, you can commit a crime and you'll get away with it if you get away with it for long enough.
Yeah.
But they're like, if they figure out who did it, but it's been too long, then you can't get charged. That actually doesn't make sense.
Then you're just like, in the press, like, I got away with it.
You can literally...
It's so weird.
Because then if your statute of limitations is up and you did something like, if you were like D.B. Cooper, you could be like, yep, that was me.
I think I know why there's a statute of limitations. Because of that amendment that gives the right to a speedy trial.
But you still can have a speedy trial after...
Well, right, but...
the trial starts once you get arrested.
Right.
So what the statute...
But I don't know. You're going to have to ask Abraham Lincoln. He's the one that came up with that amendment.
I mean, I just don't think that actually has to do with the statute of limitations.
Yeah, I think it does.
I don't think it does.
Okay, well, one of our number one listeners is actually a police officer, and he is really smart about this. So if you're listening, you know who you are. Explain to me about statute of limitations, even though I'm sure you've done it about 4 times, and I just don't listen to you.
Anyway.
He'll understand. So, years come, years go. D.B. Cooper has not been caught. So, we are getting close to the 5-year statute of limitations. So, even if he gets caught, we cannot charge him for anything. So, they changed his charges to a violation of the Hobbs Act, which is a federal statute, a federal crime meant to prevent extortion. And this charge was more open-ended, and it also did not have a statute of limitations.
See, that crime doesn't have a statute of limitations. Mm-hmm. So why do some crimes... I think because
it's a federal crime.
That doesn't make any sense.
But wouldn't it have been a federal crime anyways? Because
he
traveled across the states?
It just doesn't make sense why some crimes have it, some crimes don't. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Anyways. So, if we found D.B. Cooper tomorrow, then he could be charged with...
Because they changed the charges against him.
Then he would go to jail for a violation of the Hobbs Act. So if you're listening and you find D.B. Cooper, then he can still go to jail. Anyways.
He could be dead.
We're going to get into that. So now we're going to talk about suspects. There were 3 main suspects that came about. And also Loki. So 4 main suspects.
3 main suspects, 1 fictional suspect.
So basically, there were thousands of people that they investigated. Mm-hmm. And they kind of left it with like a couple dozen. Well, these 3 have been favorites and were talked about in a lot of the documentaries I watched. So the first one is Richard Floyd McCoy. And he was the primary suspect, and a former FBI agent has even wrote a book about this theory. So, April 7th, 1972, McCoy performed a heist on an airplane that was very similar to Cooper's. So, he went by an alias, James Johnson, and demanded $500,000.
Yeah, not a very creative name. James Johnson.
Well, it's
2 very common names.
It's better than like John Doe or something. Hi, my name is John Doe.
Is it? Because James Johnson, like, those are 2 very common names.
Here's the thing. I think an alias that's super common is a good alias.
Yeah, but if you're going to commit a crime, make it a cool name.
No. No, if you're going to commit a crime, crime is not cool.
So have a cool name.
But if you're going to commit a crime and you want to get away with it, have a name that everyone else has. Like
John Johnson.
Like Dan Smith. Everyone has the name Dan Smith.
My name's Dan Smith.
My name's Dan Smith.
Wow.
Everyone has the name Dan Smith.
Is there an actual person named Dan Smith that's like famous?
The lead singer of Bastille.
Ah, I knew it.
Yeah. Yeah, we love Bastille in this house too. You're just gonna learn a lot about my likes if you listen to this podcast.
None about mine.
You don't have any. No, I'm just kidding.
I have 0 likes, 0 interests.
So, crime is not cool, but go by a name that everyone else has. Some of the similarities include jumping off a plane at the rear exit after taking control of it,
Sounds
requesting
similar.
a total of 4 parachutes,
Sounds familiar.
passing a note to the stewardess about a bomb,
Sounds familiar.
and in both of their letters, they use the phrase, "no funny stuff."
All right, I'm convinced it was him.
Okay. So the fact that he was able to survive the jump showed that it would have been possible for Cooper to survive the jump.
And this was before Cooper?
This was after.
After Cooper.
Wait. No, it was before. It was before.
Because it was in April.
It was in April.
1972.
No, it was after. Because Cooper's was in 1971.
Ah.
So it was after. So the funny thing is that he probably would have gotten away with it if he didn't, like, brag about the crime to a friend about the crime, stating that he could have done D.B. Cooper's heist but would have asked for $500,000 instead of $200,000. Okay, crime is not cool, but if you're gonna do a crime, keep your mouth shut. Don't brag. Like, people really just wanna... They just talk, okay? Keep your mouth shut. So, he brags about it to a friend. The friend is like, that's a weird thing to say. And when they searched his home, the police, they found the stolen money. And they arrested him for his heist and Cooper's heist. So this is an interesting thing that I learned. McCoy was a student at BYU.
Brigham Young
University. And during the heist, he was arrested for, and for Cooper's hijacking, the school was on break. So it's very important that if you're going to commit a crime, don't miss class. Don't miss class. Hey, if you pay tuition, you're paying money to not go to class. So he knew, I can't miss class. I can rob a plane, but I can't miss class. So apparently, McCoy's family identified an object of his on the plane that Cooper hijacked, but it hasn't been confirmed what this object was. But some reports claim that this was a medallion from BYU that had his initials on it, but that has never been confirmed. So he was eliminated as a suspect, largely because he didn't match the description of Cooper that the witnesses provided. And he also was apparently in Utah with his family for Thanksgiving the day after the heist.
Yeah, the day after.
So he jumps off the plane at 8 p.m.
And he goes to
Utah. I mean, I don't know. So, nonetheless, he was sentenced to 45 years for his own heist, but he ended up escaping from prison. He, in jail, he made a fake gun, and he used it to escape from prison. However, he ended up dying in a shoot-off with the police. So, even if he was him, he's dead now. So that was the favorite suspect for a really long time. The
front runner?
The front runner was McCoy. So
I think it's him.
Another one is Dwayne Weber. And this man made a deathbed confession stating that he was Dan Cooper, according to his wife. So his wife later claimed that there was some evidence that tied him to the case. So apparently he had these recurrent nightmares and would talk in his sleep, muttering about leaving fingerprints on an airplane.
Interesting.
He also had a chronic knee injury that he claimed he got out of after jumping out of a plane. So I don't know. I'm sure being a wife was different back then. But if you said, I have a chronic knee injury that I got from jumping out of an airplane, I'd be like, I need some more information on that. Why were you jumping out of an airplane? Also, if you're having recurrent nightmares and waking up in the middle of the night being like, I can't leave my fingerprints on the plane, I would maybe take you to see a doctor. But maybe women couldn't do that back then. I was just like, what? So, apparently, he also took her to Tina Bar, where the money was found.
Alright, I'm convinced it was him.
But my thing is, if he was actually Dan Cooper, why would he do that? Like a guilty conscience?
Why would he do what?
Take his wife to the place where he dumped the money and not even take the money?
Maybe he took some of the money.
Like, hey babe, let's go on a vacation to
When did he
a
take
beach
her there?
in Washington.
When did he take her there?
I don't know. It didn't say in the video, but it's like, hey, babe, let's go to the beach.
Well, when?
Oh, no, we're not
Also,
going to
when?
the beach. We're going to Washington.
Also, when?
I don't know.
Well, that's important because maybe it was when he stashed the money. Or maybe he took some of the money and left 5,000 of it.
I just don't know if I'm buying this woman's story. I just don't know. I don't know. Apparently, though, he fit the description physically, and he had a very extensive criminal background. And the investigators thought that D.B. Cooper probably had an extensive criminal background. However, they did say his wife was a credible source, but he was eliminated.
Why was he eliminated?
I'm not 100% sure. I think because he's already dead.
Well, yeah, that doesn't mean he couldn't have done it.
You can't really investigate super thoroughly if they're already dead.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't mean he couldn't have done it.
I don't think.
You don't necessarily eliminate them as a suspect, though, just because they're dead.
Of the three that we're discussing, he is my least favorite of the three.
Okay.
Anyways, number 3, Kenneth Christensen. So this one is an interesting one as well. So this came from his brother. So Kenneth's brother Lyle was watching the Unsolved Mysteries episode about this and was like, oh my gosh, I think my brother is D.B. Cooper.
When?
So the episode came out, the show was running in the 80s and 90s.
Okay.
So he also claimed his brother made a vague deathbed confession about a secret he had, but that he died before he could say it. If you're making a deathbed confession, lead with the confession. Say that first and then say I have a secret. I'm D.B. Cooper. I have a secret. You gotta say it first. We gotta get that out.
No, you shouldn't follow up with your confession with I have a secret because you already told the secret.
If you're on your deathbed, make the confession. I was like, dude, he said I have a secret and died.
Leave that. Or if you don't have a confession on your deathbed, say I have a secret. Anyways. And then
that actually sounds like fun.
Die.
Just leave him guessing. Just
say, I have something to tell you before I go.
Yeah, then people be like, oh my gosh.
And then
in reality, you're just playing one last joke on your family.
What a way to go out.
That's a way to do it.
That's how I want to go out. Fooling everyone.
So why does he think that his brother is D.B. Cooper? So apparently Kenneth loved to drink bourbon. He worked for the same airline that Cooper hijacked.
What does bourbon have to do with anything?
Because he ordered a bourbon soda.
Oh. I'm sure plenty of people like bourbon.
Yeah. And he also purchased a home fully in cash shortly after the crime occurred, as well as loaning someone money to purchase a home for themselves. So, he had a very modest income working for the airline. They said how much he made. It was $150 a week.
Not a lot.
No. And
well, how much were houses then? $60?
Yeah. But basically, they said he would not have been able to have the money to pay for the house outright on his salary. His photo was shown to one of the flight attendants, and she said that he looked the most like her description of any person that they'd been shown a photograph of, but that she could not definitively say it was him.
Okay.
The FBI said he didn't match the description, which is the flight attendant said he did, but that's neither here or there. So Kenneth also had a history as a paratrooper during World War II, but the FBI believed that Cooper was not a trained or skilled parachuter at the time. Some people did. He also didn't have a criminal background that the FBI suspected Cooper had. So, those were the 3 main suspects. The 4th?
Cool. No?
I can't say it, but I have a bullet point right there. Is Loki.
If you've seen Loki on Disney Plus,
it's a good show.
Then you get this.
Yeah, it's a good show.
If you haven't, it's not really a spoiler, so you can still watch it.
Yeah, isn't it in the first episode?
I think it is.
Yeah.
Or second.
Loki's actually a very confusing show, so...
I don't think it was confusing.
I was pretty confused.
Made sense to me.
Anyways, moving on. So, an interesting factoid about this case There was a European comic book from the 1960s that depicted a hero who was a pilot and did things like parachuting out of airplanes. The hero's name was Dan Cooper. So some people think that the man who assumed the identity Dan Cooper was inspired by the comic book hero.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's a really interesting connection.
Yeah.
So now comes the big question, and it's kind of like the last question that we're going to talk about. Did he even survive the jump from the plane? Many people think that he didn't, and the FBI concluded that he was not a skilled parachuter for a few reasons. So one of the parachutes that he took was not functional, and one was a training chute that he couldn't steer. So basically, he would just kind of go wherever the wind blew him. I did not know you could steer parachutes.
Yeah.
I did not know that. I kind of just thought you jumped and the wind just took you where it took you. But yeah, you couldn't steer this one.
I mean, to a certain extent, yes, the wind does take you where it takes you, but you can steer.
Yeah. So a quote from one of the investigators on the case said, "No experienced parachutist would have jumped in the pitch black night, in the rain, with 200-mile-an-hour wind in his face, wearing loafers and a trench coat." So another thing, it was dark and it was really windy. There was also no ground visibility when he jumped due to the cloud cover, and he would have ended up jumping into a wooded area. So he also did not bring gloves or goggles, and when he was presented with the instructions for the parachute by the flight attendant, he said he didn't need them. That was very considerate of the flight attendant. I would have just been like, here's your freaking chute. I'm
Please
not going to tell you how to
blow us
use
up.
it. I will not tell you how
Well,
to use
they're
it.
probably being nice here, like, please don't blow us up. You know.
That was very polite of her. Here's the instructions, sir.
Please don't kill me.
I'd be like, take the instructions and shove them. I mean, anyways.
I think you would probably act differently if somebody had a bomb.
I would probably just be in the
You
corner.
would cry.
Crying.
Yeah.
Also, the money itself added an additional 21 pounds to his load, and that would have made the jump even more dangerous. However, some people think that the additional 21 pounds wouldn't have added much of anything and that it would have been fine. So, the problem is his remains have never been found,
Right.
and the parachute has never been found. So, whether or not he survived is kind of... we don't know.
Yeah.
The case was officially closed in 2016, after 45 years and thousands of suspects reviewed by the FBI. And like I said, it's still considered to be one of the biggest unsolved mysteries of all time. Essentially, if you go to the FBI website, which I did, they said that they weren't going to allocate any more resources to it.
Makes sense. I mean, what's the point now?
Yeah, and reallocate those resources to other cases, but that if someone came forward with a credible tip, that they would investigate it. So, as we conclude, who do you think he is, or do you think he even survived?
Well, the signs kind of point to him not surviving, but I do think if he didn't survive, we would have found the body. Or there would have been some sort of evidence. Like, it just doesn't make sense how he would have died but been unable to be found. Unless he was, like, eaten. If he, like, you know...
And the parachute?
Maybe they ate the parachute. Like a bear ate the parachute. I don't know. Anyway, my point being, I don't know. Seems
Aren't bears hibernating at that time of year?
unlikely. I don't know. So I think he survived. I think of the people you talked about, McCoy is the one that like stands out to me the most, but my big thing is that he confessed to the other one basically, but he didn't brag about the D.B. Cooper one. His brag was like, oh, I could pull off D.B. Cooper's thing. Not saying, oh yeah, I pulled off D.B. Cooper's thing because I'm D.B. Cooper. Like, So that kind of gives me pause about him, because it's like, well, if he bragged about the one, why didn't he brag about the other?
Right.
And then the other two, maybe the guy on his deathbed, I don't know. I feel like if his wife was actually a credible source, then they would have said... I mean, here's the thing. Easiest thing to do is if you want to close a case and you're like, it's been a long time, pin it on a dead guy. What are they going to do?
Right.
Not like you're not going to take him to jail. You don't have to do any extra work. You just say, yeah, there was this dead guy. I don't know. So I don't know. Maybe it was one of those two guys. Maybe it was the third. Maybe it was an alien.
Maybe. I think it's tough for me because I think there's part of me that says he died. And I think that's the logical side of me that's thinking there's no way he would have survived with all of these variables stacked against him.
Yeah.
But my thing is, if he didn't survive, I feel like we would have found his body.
Yeah.
We would have found a parachute.
If he didn't survive, where's the evidence?
Where is the rest of the money?
Yep.
He stole $200,000 and we've only found $5,800. I feel like that's a lot of evidence. And I understand, like, the Pacific Northwest has a lot of really wooded areas. But you'd think after 45 years...
Maybe D.B. Cooper's Bigfoot.
Maybe. You'd think after 45 years, something would have come up. And, like, there would be some evidence. And I'm also kind of like, well, how did the money get to Tinavar? Like, the idea of it going into the river makes sense to me. What?
I figured it out.
What?
D.B. Cooper jumped out of the plane, went to live up near that one river that I didn't know where it was.
The Washougal.
The Washougal. And the county where you said is Bigfoot County. Skamania County. Started living life as Bigfoot. And eventually died up in Skamania County.
And Bigfoot's buried him.
No.
Because we know Bigfoot's buried their dead.
I'm saying he lived as Bigfoot. And he died, and because he was so good at hiding, because he was a Bigfoot, pretending to be a Bigfoot, they could never find his body. His money was where he stashed it in the river, and then it got carried down to the beach. You don't seem convinced.
No.
I think it makes sense.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. D.B. Cooper is Bigfoot.
Yeah. Dan Bigfoot Cooper. That's
Dan
what the B
Bigfoot
stands
Cooper. No, I also think that he was at least a little bit experienced as a parachuter, because me, a layperson, never been on a parachute before.
Never been on.
Never had
you
a parachute.
You don't go on a parachute.
I don't know anything. Okay, I never parachuted before. I wouldn't be like, I am going to attempt for the first time in my life to jump out of an airplane with a parachute in the middle of a storm.
You also wouldn't ever think to try and rob an airplane.
No, but I just I feel like you would have to have some level of experience to be like, yeah, I'm going to do it when the conditions are bad.
That makes sense.
So I think that of the ones that I talked about, McCoy makes sense and Christensen makes sense. But it also makes sense that he's dead, but it also does not make sense that he's dead.
I think it makes sense that he's dead. I don't think it makes sense that he died on the jump out of the plane. Because I think we would have found him.
Yeah, this one's a real head scratcher.
He could have died sometime else after stashing the money and hiding himself.
Yeah. This is a real head scratcher for me. I think it makes more sense. So Kenneth Christensen used the money. If they think it was him, he used money.
But then couldn't they track down the money by going to the person that he bought the house from?
I don't know. I mean, it just makes sense. Why would you steal $200,000 to never use it? You go through all of this, you jump out of an airplane, and you never use the money? It just doesn't make sense to me. That you would just bury it on a beach in Washington. I don't know. This one's a real head scratcher. And we'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on this one. If there's a suspect that we did not cover that you think is, responsible, or if there's a reason that you think one of these suspects did it, or if you think he survived, we would be really interested in hearing that. So let us know you guys' thoughts. Thank you for joining us for our first episode of 2022. And yeah,
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We really want to hear your thoughts on this one because this one's
it's cool.
a head scratcher.
It's interesting.
And if you have any other cases you want us to discuss, let me know. Anyways, thank you guys. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.